Good morning and welcome to today's webcast. My name is Josh Stevens. Today's topic is Advanced IP Address Management. First off, a big howdy from the SolarWinds headquarters here in Austin, Texas. As I mentioned before, my name is Josh Stevens. I'm the head geek and VP of technology here at SolarWinds. And today we're lucky enough to have with us Brandon Shop, who's a good friend of mine, and also the product manager who owns, among other things, our IP Address Management product suite. Thanks a lot, Brandon, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And, today we're going to talk about Advanced IP Address Management. This is actually a similar presentation that we've done live a few times, so we'll be speeding through it, but be sure to ask questions anytime during the presentation if you have them using the Q&A panel. Now, you might be wondering about now, well, who is SolarWinds? SolarWinds is a leading provider of network management applications. We really specialize in making tools and applications for network management and network engineering that are easy to acquire. You can download them right from SolarWinds.com. They're very easy to use, and they're very affordable. Our customers include over 80,000 paying customers, over 80% of the Fortune 500, customers both from the very large Fortune 100 enterprises to the very small businesses, and over 1 million active users of our products out in the world today. And of course, the SolarWinds community, which really is just a collection point for these network engineers and system administrators to collaborate and congregate and talk about technology, is located at thwack.com, THWACK, and we'll talk about that more in just a few minutes. A little bit about today's agenda. Of course, we did our introductions. We'll talk about traditional IP address management, sort of IP address management back when I was growing up, you might say, as a network engineer. We'll talk about how that differs from IP address management today. We'll do some trivia questions. Remember to submit your answers for the trivia via the Q&A panel. And the first 5 correct answers for each question will win a SolarWinds t-shirt. If you are identified as a winner at the end of the webcast, please email your shirt size and shipping address to headgeek@solarwinds.com. We'll talk about ways of simplifying IP address management in your organization. We'll talk about some things consultants could help you with and/or applications might help you with. We'll talk a little bit about IPv6. We won't dwell on it a long time, but we'll tell you what you really need to know about it. Some IPv4, v6 hybrid stats. We'll talk about IP address management tools and technologies. We'll do a short demo of the IP address management solutions from SolarWinds. And of course, we'll have an extended Q&A. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Brandon, you've been doing network engineering and consulting for a long time. And, I can't think of a topic that's more near and dear to most people's hearts in this community than IP addressing, because we spent a lot of times doing this.
Yep, that's correct.
And, I would imagine in your career you've probably owned a few of those large IP address spreadsheets where you've had to track things by hand, and it's not a lot of fun.
No, it's not. It's definitely it's a nightmare to keep up to date.
Yeah, and back in the old days in traditional IP address management, way back when I got started, I'm a little older than you, but, DHCP wasn't even available yet. I don't know if any of the attendees out there remember this, but, back in the old days, you had to statically address every single host on the network, and it was really, really a pain. And so, some things have changed over the years. Now, the other thing that was different back then was we all used public IP addresses. Back in those days, things like NAT weren't really developed yet, and NAT, even after it was first released, was hard to use, and so people really tried to rely on public IP address space, anytime that they could, because there were plenty of addresses available.
And back in the traditional days, everything was routable. So, as Josh mentioned, since it's public address space, you can get to everything publicly.
And that offers a lot of advantages, in terms of true visibility into network applications and performance, being able to see the traffic end to end. Also back then, there were sort of standard-sized subnets, right? It seemed like as a consultant, I worked on, hundreds and hundreds of networks. And, almost every subnet was a /24. If it was a WAN link, it was probably a 4-address subnet. And that's not necessarily the case today.
Correct. I mean, yeah, Class C was kind of the standard default answer, and now today you can do, subnetting a subnet, and there's tons of new technologies.
Yeah, and also back then, people didn't really think about multiple addresses per user. I mean, if you had 200 users, you could put them on a /24 and not worry about it. Whereas today, best practices really allow for, in many cases, 5 to 10 addresses per user on any different subnet. So it's a very different environment. There was a simple type of IP allocation. You had simpler subnets. You had typically 1 address per user. You put them all on a spreadsheet, and you just went with it. And of course, they were just 32 itty-bitty bits. I mean, how hard could it be, right? 4 octets. I can remember IP addresses from my first network as a professional that I still have memorized today by heart. the addresses of my DNS server, the addresses of my core routers, they're still burned into memory forever. And since they were public addresses, they're probably still on those IP addresses. But definitely things are a little bit different today.
Definitely. I mean, today, as Josh was mentioning, we have private addressing. So, you can use NAT to define a building or a location or an office, and so that way you don't have to have everything be public addressable. So, and with that, you have a set of challenges around overlapping and duplicate address ranges, since you can duplicate IP ranges.
Yeah, and overlapping or duplicate IP address ranges are, really one of the harder things to deal with out in the industry. Not only from a network management perspective. I mean, if you have an NMS like Orion and you're trying to monitor 3 different buildings, all with the same 192.168, .7/24, how do you do the routing? How do you do the NAT? It can get really, really complicated. Now, in enterprise organizations, a lot of times you'll just readdress to do that. But think about, the MSP environment where you can't force your customers to readdress the networks just to monitor them. And so this can really become very complicated very quickly, especially if you're doing mergers and acquisitions and companies are combining. I met with a great lady last week who runs a very large network. She's just decided to roll out a brand new IP addressing scheme, readdress the entire enterprise, and right before she was about to start, she had all the design and schemas done. She found out they're merging with another company, and she needs to roll all their address space in too. So it can really get complicated in a hurry. The other thing that was different is we didn't used to do variable length subnet masking. You used to be able to do classful addressing everywhere, and it just made it a little simpler. People would say things like, "Oh, it's a building, in Austin. Just give it a Class C." Well, classful addressing really has almost no place today unless you're an internet carrier and you're doing BGP route summarization or something. So, really it's a whole different world.
And as we move into the IPv6 or realm of the industry, so typically today that's typically it's deployed in the federal space pretty heavily and within the ISP environment, but it hasn't propagated largely down to the enterprise environment. But it's getting there quickly, and
Well,
it
it is.
introduces a whole set of new challenges.
It does, and it's something you have to think about at least that you didn't used to, right?
Yeah, it's not just for 4 octets like you said earlier with a V4 address. There's a lot more challenges around IPv6 and implementing that and updating your infrastructure around that.
That's right. And even if the question is just whether or not to do it, it's just one extra thing that can complicate your life. Wow, we're already ready for trivia question number 1. Now, I think you've seen the new Star Trek movie. Is that correct?
I have.
And how'd you like it?
I enjoyed it.
I had a blast, man. I had tears in my eyes from the moment it started. And I still have chill bumps today. So, yeah, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Now, remember, the first 5 correct answers will win a SolarWinds T-shirt. Use the Q&A panel to submit your answer, and then we'll identify the winners later on. And let's go ahead. So what does the USS stand for in the name USS Enterprise? And I actually didn't know the answer to this without looking it up myself. So we'll wait on 5 correct answers. I didn't, so I'm getting some weird looks from the room here. We already have our 5 correct answers. Wow, that was quick. And so, I will accept either answer, either United States ship or United Planet Starship. So it depends on sort of which movie you're talking about, which show, and when it was introduced. It could mean either one. But I thought they did a fantastic job with the film.
I definitely agree.
Sometimes it's sort of hard to know where to start. Let's assume that you've decided to take hold of your IP addressing. Maybe it's just become a mess over the years. Maybe you're brand new. You were just hired, and as the new, network engineer in charge, you've decided, okay, I got to figure out what's going on. And chances are you didn't assign the first IP address on that network, right? Unless you are readdressing the entire network. I can't think of a situation where I know someone who's been around long enough to assign the first address on the network.
No, me neither. I've talked to many of the customers, who've been adopting our new IPAM solution, and a lot of them are talking about how they inherited the network,
Yeah.
and the challenges associated with that, and having to manage that and just deal with inherent challenges that they were given to them.
That's right. That's right. And other things is just about everything has an IP address these days, right? In the Fed space, it's especially complicated because most of my DoD customers will have at least 2, if not 5, parallel networks. They have classified networks and unclassified networks. They have networks for specific operational purposes, and they all run in parallel, which can make it really complicated. But nowadays, everything has an IP address. I have several appliances in my home that have IP addresses. In my office here, I think there are, just kind of looking around me, 11 different devices that
Yep.
all have IPs just in my small office here at SolarWinds. So it's really more complicated. It's not just about computers that use DHCP. It's about IP-based cameras and phones and all the different technology we have. And to speak on the network, they need an IP address. And you're waving your iPhone at me, so that's another great example, right?
Yeah, definitely so. I mean, another technology that introduces complexity into this is, back in the day, you didn't have a lot of wireless infrastructure. Users were plugged into the wall, and that was kind of it. Now you've got users, going from one access point to the other. You've got people connecting with iPhones. You've got people bringing in their own gear and infrastructure and connecting it
Oh,
into
and
the
think
network.
about virtual technology.
Exactly.
You may have one physical server with 32 different VMs on it. It can get complicated. These IP address schemes can get complicated in a hurry, right? You might have planned in the old days to allow for a set number of IP addresses per user, or a certain number of, for instance, you might have said on any /24 in a building, the first 5 addresses are for infrastructure. And you figured, okay, well, I've got my router, and that uses 1, and maybe I had a second router later for hot standby, so that uses 3 total. But next thing you know, you've got wireless access point and Ethernet switches. You know, all these different things that are really infrastructure oriented, and your schema can get really complicated really fast. And I already mentioned the parallel networks, but sometimes it's hard to know. It can be complicated, it can be a little bit daunting, it can be a little bit intimidating.
Be overwhelming.
It can be overwhelming. And so, there are some great tools out there that can actually help you get a handle on your IP address space. The first thing I would recommend is, go ahead and do an audit or an inventory of your network. And there are some great tools out there. There are open source applications that can help with this. Certainly, the engineer's tool set we produce here at SolarWinds is a great asset for this, as well as Land Surveyor. But do a discovery and, really inventory the network. You might be surprised at the different address ranges you have deployed that you didn't even know about.
And you can use different network discovering technologies out there to get to know your network. So, Josh mentioned the Land Surveyor product here from SolarWinds, and we use a host of technologies to go out there and discover the network from CDP to LDP. And just, as Josh said, sometimes you'll be surprised what you'll find out on your infrastructure, both in hardware, where people brought gear in from outside, and also from where people have maybe somebody, if you're a global enterprise, where somebody in a different geo has added subnets that you didn't know about.
That's right. That's right. And one of the other things that happens a lot is people sort of lose track of where those ranges have extended and moved. And so, I say this on almost every webcast, but, one of my best recommendations to everyone out there on the line is, you should document the network. Create a ginormous Visio drawing. Use Land Surveyor, can automate that for you. But, detail the network, detail it with which gear you have, where your routers are, how they're connected, the switches, and put the subnets on there, the IP addresses. Print that sucker off and print it up on the wall. Use a plotter, go to Teamtails, whatever you have to do. But that will not only help ease your job and make it easier, but it just looks good for you to have that kind of technology around. And it really is one of the best things I can tell you. Another thing that's important is, readdress when and where it's necessary. A lot of people put off readdressing projects for way too long. And as soon as you realize that, for instance, you've decided to merge with another company, you decide to buy a company. Your company's, 4 times as big and you've bought a smaller company. We bought 3 companies in the last 3 years. The moment that happens, as part of that early planning process, plan on readdressing. The sooner you readdress, the easier your life will be. And I can tell you that every day new devices are addressed on that network, and your problem will get exponentially worse as time goes by.
And you want to do rediscover often. So, as Josh said, the network's very dynamic in nature. It's going to be changing from day to day. If you buy a company, if you're rolling out additional offices or infrastructure, or you're migrating infrastructure, it's going to change. It's going to be very dynamic. So you need to constantly keep that up to date.
So some steps for, simplifying IP address management. Number one is really, really, really learn IP addressing. And a lot of us out there, sort of understand IP addressing and kind of know how it works. But if you're the engineer in charge, or you're on a network and you're responsible for any role in network engineering or network management or system administration, if you're doing IP address assignment and tracking, you need to really understand IP addressing. For me, it never made complete sense until someone went to a whiteboard, converted them into binary, and explained to me how subnet masks really work. And whether you have to go to a class or read some books or watch some tutorials on our website or some of the videos, really understanding that technology so that it's second nature can be a huge, huge asset just to how effective you are as an engineer over your career. So that would be my first tip.
And the second is, get rid of overlapping IP address space. I mean, it's just a good practice to have and to, put into your infrastructure for everyday use.
Yeah, now certainly there are cases where you can't do this, obviously, but where you can, it really will simplify your life. Spend adequate time designing your IP address schemas. People tend to just want to run out and deploy technology. I'm that way, right? I get a new toy and I want to play with it that day. And so, much like when you're deploying a new infrastructure, whether it's WAN optimization or whether you're doing NetFlow or IPSLA, any technology you're going to deploy, you want to spend time designing the way it's going to work. And IP address schemas are no different. Spend some time really thinking about growth, where you want to be in 5 years and 3 years in terms of your network, and spend some time really designing these schemas and then try to stick with them.
And leverage your IP address tracking tools. So as Josh already mentioned, we have solutions within the engineer's tool set today, and then we'll talk about here today a couple new tools we've just introduced to the market with our Orion module, as well as a free tool we introduced to the market to assist in that.
Yeah, I mean, I was out in D.C. last week, and I spoke to a group of about 50 or so people about IP address management, and I think all but 2 currently used Excel to manage their IP addresses. And we've all been there, and Excel can do a lot of great things for you. But certainly there are some great tools from us, from open source tools. There are a lot of solutions out there that can help automate that and just take some of the pain away from you. And last but not least, move to IPv6 as soon as it's reasonable. And I don't mean as soon as it's possible. I mean as soon as it's reasonable. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, I just attended an IPv6 summit with Jeff Doyle and Scott Hogg out in Denver. And I came back drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I came back completely pumped and excited about IPv6. I'm working to convert my house over to IPv6 now. It's been quite an interesting project, and but people are a little bit scared about the technology. They don't really know what they need to know. And so I thought we talked about that a little bit. Well, number one, yes, it is really coming. I don't see any way right now that we can avoid this happening at some point. Now, I could be wrong. There could be some new technology that comes out and just leapfrogs IPv6. But unless that happens, this is going to be a reality, within the span of our careers.
Yeah, definitely.
And if we just start from scratch, I believe we'd all be using IPv6 today. To me, IPv6 is really simpler than IPv4. It's a very cool technology. There are a lot of things like, automatic IP address allocation and there's some great technology that makes this an easier foundation for you. The problem is we all learned IPv4 first.
Definitely.
And it's sort of like growing up speaking English and then as an adult trying to learn Spanish. It's hard to change, even though Spanish is an easier language to learn from birth. And so, it's difficult technology, but I really believe if we could start from scratch, we'd all be using it today because it is a superior technology.
And for now, from working with a lot of our customers, we've seen typically that this has been mostly deployed in lab environments. We haven't seen where it's been rolled out in production and large scale. And if we have seen it, it's been primarily where it's dual stacked.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I talk to customers, the only customers I've seen that are routing production IPv6 traffic are usually service providers that have a need to do that. I've not talked to a single enterprise or federal customer yet who's actually running IPv6 in a production role, although they are rolling it out in labs and playing with it. And of course, in many cases, this might surprise you, but a lot of organizations are using IPv6. They don't even know it because it's on by default in most of the newer OSs.
Correct.
And so, but they may not be routing it. Be sure your vendors have a plan. I don't think it's time to start limiting where you buy products because devices or applications may or may not fully support IPv6 because you aren't going to use it today. And there are a lot of technologies that really don't even quite yet have an answer for IPv6, like good ways of doing network scanning, for instance. But be sure your vendors have a plan. Be sure they're moving down the road and they fully understand it and have a plan. And that's really what you want to know. If you talk to a vendor, if you're about to buy some software or hardware and you ask about IPv6, and they say, oh, well, IPv6 isn't going to ever be a reality. We don't care about it. Or they say, well, we haven't really thought about that. be scared. As long as they have a
Definitely.
plan, I wouldn't worry so much about full compatibility. But definitely be sure they have a plan.
Agree.
And remember, in most cases, you couldn't switch now even if you tried. And I've tried. And it was interesting because the young lady last week that was readdressing your entire network, one of her questions was, well, for all these user subnets, can I go ahead and just deploy IPv6 today? Should I just go ahead and start there? And it was an interesting question because she really put me on the spot with that. And she was pretty much going to do whatever I suggested at that point, and I felt a lot of pressure in how to answer. But I don't believe it's time in a corporate environment yet to go in a pure play IPv6 for user subnets. Now, I do believe in going hybrid and doing dual stack. I do believe that there are many cases where that's a pure advantage. And if you do dual stack today and you do IPv4 and IPv6, then later on it's a matter of turning off IPv4 rather than migrating everything.
It's all about taking baby steps.
It's all about
Moving in.
taking baby steps. So, while I tell you that it's really coming, and man, I'd love you to move there as soon as it's reasonable, it's not reasonable in most cases to completely switch yet, but do start thinking about how to run both and how to start migrating technology in that direction, especially if you're an organization that leverages a lot of custom-built applications that have to be, rewritten to use IPv6 down the road.
So on that point, I mean, hybrid's going to be around for quite a long time. So I mean, like you said, it's not going to just switch off one day your V4, next day your V6. I mean, you can start primarily adopting V6 in the future, but V4 addresses are going to be around for quite some time. Probably, like you said earlier, we won't see the end of V4 in our generation.
Yeah, and what we mean by hybrid really is just networks that run both. They're a combination of IPv4 and IPv6. Much like a hybrid car is a combination of gasoline and electric, or a hybrid bass is a combination of a white bass and a striper. For me, since I'm a big fisherman, but it's really, we're just saying it's kind of both things at once, right? Don't try to go in either direction, but these things will be happening, and there are multiple ways to run IPv4 and IPv6 together. You can do NAT, you can do tunneling. There are many ways to make those coexist in an easy way, but and so don't be afraid to go ahead and start it. And with all technology, I fundamentally believe that what makes us technologists, what makes us good at our jobs, is that we're not afraid to play with new technology. When a gadget shows up, we tend to be the first to unbox it and dive in. And so start playing with IPv6. It is the best way to learn. It's what makes us technologists. I come from a long line of technologists. My great-grandfather, back in the early 1900s, the town doctor bought the first car and had it shipped in on a train. And when the car arrived, he hired my great-grandfather, to figure it out and then teach him how to drive it. Because some people like us, Brandon, and most people on the phone probably, we like technology. We like to figure things out. We don't need a manual. The last thing I read is the book, right? And then we go and figure out how to make it work. And by using it, by putting our hands on it, it becomes second nature. It becomes really something we know. And so start using IPv6. Start finding ways to get it out, even if it's just in your office. Find a way to expose yourself to this technology so that you'll be more informed, and it will be something that you're more comfortable discussing down the road.
Yeah, definitely. The best way to learn it is by doing it.
Okay, we're ready for Star Trek trivia question number 2. Now remember, the first 5 correct answers will get a free SolarWinds t-shirt. I'll identify the winners at the end, excuse me. And also, you'll use the Q&A panel to submit your answer. You can only win one, so if you won the other one, no reason to answer here. Here we go. True or false? Klingon is spoken verbally in the new Star Trek movie. Now, I bet we're going to have, we already have the answers. Wow, that was really, really quick. So you can stop sending them in. But it's actually false. It was originally included within the movie. There was a Klingon prison scene where they spoke Klingon. However, that scene was cut, and this has actually incited several complaints among some diehard Star Trek fans, especially the people who actually learned Klingon and can speak it fluently, that there was none actually spoken in the new film. So I would imagine that'll be something that they remedy within the either the next one or the one after that, whenever they bring the Klingons back and have some more interaction there. So there are some really cool IP address management tools and technologies out there that can ease your job. IP address subnet calculators. Certainly, a lot of people use the one from SolarWinds. There are some other ones out there, but I personally, I can't remember the last time I did subnetting by hand without a subnet calculator.
Oh, definitely. I use it all the time.
Yeah, so you definitely want to, and this is one of those cases where you want to understand how to do the IP addressing by hand. It's important, just like it's important to know how to do adding addition and subtraction and multiplication by hand.
But you still use a
But you
calculator.
still use a calculator to make it
Exactly.
faster, right? And so definitely find your favorite calculator. There's a free one at SolarWinds.com. You can download it, try it out. Also there are some great IP address tracking tools out there that make it a lot easier to see which addresses are in use, how full your DHCP scopes are, for instance, and really to understand how the IP addresses are allocated, in real time.
And so there's also some great IP address management software out there, including a new module we just brought to the market last month, Orion IP Address Manager. It's tools are meant to be very end user focused, whereas kind of management software will allow multiple users. If you span globally and have multiple users or network engineers managing the infrastructure, you want them to have an infrastructure that you can commonly go and log into, to track the IP address space.
Yeah, before we go into the SolarWinds products and kind of show you the IP address manager, you might be wondering, well, why do I care? What makes SolarWinds different? Who uses the products? How can they really help you? The thing that really makes SolarWinds products different is our products are really written around making network engineers' jobs easier. I mean, to me, one of the things that we focus on as a company, that why I like working here, is we really focus on making people successful, whether those are employees or customers or investors. It's really about making people successful, and I believe that some of our software can make you successful out there doing network engineering. We can up your game, per se. And so the great products are easy to use. You can actually download them and try them out yourself anytime from SolarWinds.com for free. And of course, many other customers use them. And you don't need to take our word for it. Go to thwack.com, the online community, and don't talk to a sales guy. Just talk to some other customers and see what they're doing, what technology they're leveraging, and how they like it. It's really a great place to find that. This is a screenshot of the SolarWinds Advanced Subnet Calculator, which is the one I use every day. Brandon, I'm sure you guys, especially since you've done the new IP address management tool, I'm sure you guys ran through several different schemas for pricing and different mechanisms here, and probably doesn't know this application very well.
Oh yeah. So instead of, like you said, drawing it out by hand, I pop this up and use this to kind of help steer me and guide me.
Another thing that's brand new from SolarWinds is there's now an IP address tracker tool, which is a completely free tool. You can download from SolarWinds.com. It's not a limited version of something else. It's a free application, and it's a great application. You can enter in your subnets, your buildings. It can do automatic scanning and tracking to tell you which ones are available. It's very lightweight, and for a lot of people, this is an orders of magnitude easier than using a spreadsheet.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the main values here is Josh already hit on it, is spreadsheets you have to update them manually, and this you can go ahead and set out and scan the network and see what's actually being used, and then you can export that, and if you want to do statistics on it, things along those lines. But it gets you out of the business of having to manually update spreadsheets,
That's
which
right.
is half the battle.
And a little bit about the SolarWinds strategy, and I'll just skip through this because this really isn't a sales presentation, but they're powerful and practical applications that are easy to use and deploy, simple to use and maintain, and most importantly, probably they're community guided. We really want feedback from everyone out there that uses the products, so we can make them the best products in the world. We really believe in listening to the community and taking those things to heart. I'm going to now bring up the product, which is the Orion IP Address Manager. Okay, so what I've got in front of me now is the Orion Network Performance Monitor. Now, Orion NPM is sort of the main product within the Orion product family. And what Orion NPM gives you is a great performance and fault management application. Some things you'll want to notice right off the top of the list are, for instance, the all nodes list on the left. And this is just an easy way of displaying the different devices on the network. What you want to remember, though, is whether they're Cisco routers and switches and firewalls, or Dell or Extreme, or Brocade, which now owns Foundry, or Juniper, whether it's their Windows servers or Linux servers or Solaris. Orion monitors all those things right out of the box without you needing to do anything to customize it. It also provides some real easy-to-use mapping functionality, so you can build topological representation of the network. So you can see when you have a problem, things will turn red. You drill down and see where the problem actually is and who all that would be affecting on the network. Some of the really popular views are like the top 10 lists, because they give you a top 10 list of About 100 different categories. Things like top 10 servers by response time or by CPU load, top 10 switch ports by traffic rates or WAN interfaces by percent utilization. You can see things like the volumes that are about to be full, and believe it or not, that's one of the common things that still causes issues for users out there is their hard drive fills up and you don't know about it until it's too late. You can see wireless clients by traffic rates, errors and discards, tons of different data. And of course, whenever you see something that's interesting, like this call path for voice over IP, I can just drill down on it and then get more detail about that, both with real-time gauges and then charts to show history over time and show me when the problem started occurring. I can see that if I click on the chart actually back up to a year by default. I can extend it for longer. Very, very easy to use. Now, since it's also a fault management application, of course it does alerting, can notify you when you have a problem. It does syslog and trap reception and events and all the different things you'd expect from a fault management application, along with the performance management side, like the traffic utilization, the trending and analysis and SLA management. Whether you want to see that in a chart or you want to go generate a report, it makes it very, very easy to use. Now, we actually offer Orion by itself. It does great fault performance management. And then you can also extend that with several different modules or add-ons, we call them. And, the modules include things like NetFlow for doing traffic analysis. And I would imagine most people on the line have played with NetFlow at some point in their career. It's a great technology from Cisco. We actually support both Cisco's NetFlow and JFlow and SFlow and, IPFix soon. So lots of great stuff there to show you who's using your bandwidth on the network and what they're doing with it. There's one that does voice over IP. It's both for managing Cisco VoIP networks and managing their call managers, and also for really any VoIP network or any network where latency-sensitive traffic is present, where you have Cisco routers in the environment, because Cisco routers and switches support a really cool technology called IPSLA, which allows you to basically turn those devices into sort of probes on the network to run tests for you, and the VoIP monitor takes advantage of that. Now, actually, if you go to solarwinds.com/geek, there are recorded webcasts, hour-long, that go in great detail about NetFlow, IPSLA, application performance management, how to keep from playing the blame game and being blamed as a network engineer for application problems. All those things are available. But today, we're really here to talk about, IP address management. And the IP address manager is a brand new module to Orion. Very easy to add on, quite inexpensive, very easy to deploy, and it really does a good job of giving you an idea of how your subnets are allocated and making it easy to throw away those spreadsheets and start tracking this dynamically.
Definitely, and that's a great point. Is ditch the spreadsheets and bring this into a centralized online framework that you can leverage the capabilities that Orion brings to the table with alerting and reporting and things along those lines.
Yeah, when you first bring up IPAM, the first thing you see is sort of a summary page that shows you really some resource to tell you where you have subnets that are, super highly used or allocated, which addresses are available. You can, of course, drill down then on those subnets and see more detail about them. You can see, VoIP subnets. You can sort these by what their use cases are. But my favorite views are under the Manage Subnets tab, because this is really where you get to go in and add IP addresses or add subnets and start assigning them and tracking them at a very detailed level. And it makes it just very, very easy to sort and organize your address space, even if you have duplicate address space, or even IPv6 and IPv4 together. It makes it easy to sort all this and track it dynamically.
Definitely, you can look at it in a relational manner that makes sense to you. So you can see it on the left there in a hierarchical organization, and you can really organize it and set it up to view it how it makes sense to you.
You can go in, of course, manually track these and set the statuses. It will also do automated scanning to let you know, dynamically which addresses are in use and when the last time they were seen. You can start to notify you that, hey, I've assigned this IP address to Lee, but for some reason Brandon's using it now. So it can resolve those types of issues and notify you. Great application, very, very easy to use. And it just kind of makes sense, right? It does all the things you'd expect it to do if you were wanting an IP address management application. So real easy to use. Fits right into Orion. Not only does it do the tabular views, but there are also chart views for each subnet showing you, where you have devices, where you have subnets that are, overly utilized or you're about to run out of address space and things of that nature. So real easy to use. You can download a copy today and try it out. Remember, it is an add-on to Orion.
Definitely.
So the last but not least, before I jump back to the presentation, thwack.com is our online social community or social networking site. I mentioned it earlier, but really it's a great place to go to really experience what it's like to collaborate with other network engineers and network managers and sysadmins out there. both that use our technologies and that don't. Right? I mean, there are 22,000 active members of Thwack today. It's growing very rapidly. There are many, many other users that don't log in, that just view guest access, especially as part of the evaluation process. There are user forums for all the different products we offer. There's a content exchange zone, which is pretty cool because it's a way for you to share, technology you've helped develop, like special monitors for APM or special views for NetFlow or something like that. Custom pollers for UNDP. And then let other users import and export those and share, almost like an open source community, but for licensed software. So it's great, great technology. And excuse me. And of course, there's a great blog out there written by yours truly. I hope you all would go visit it and read about it sometime, because it can be somewhat entertaining. At least it seems that way to me late at night when I'm writing it. So remember, thwack.com is a great place to go for all those types of needs. If you're not a member, go join today. So, I wanted to have a longer Q&A today because when we've done this presentation before, there were a lot of questions. And so I wanted to try to hit as many of those as we could. And as soon as we have the names of the winners, go ahead and let me know those, and then we'll go ahead and announce that. Let's go ahead and get to the show. So here we go. We do have the winners. If I say your name, that means that you won a T-shirt. The winners are Billy V, Paul L, Philip M, Bill B, Mark T, Brian K, Mark F, Kevin S, Michael E, and Ryan M. First of all, thank you for attending the webcast. Of course, you can go to SolarWinds.com to see and download free trials of all of our software and all the free tools. SolarWinds.com/geek to see other webcasts and the recorded version of this one. But Brandon, let's go ahead and jump over the Q&A and start answering some questions. So here's a great question from Jared. He says, what about mixing, public and private IP addressing schemes? I mean, not all IPs that need to be on the public internet. And, it's a great point. I mean, I think that there probably are very few organizations out in the world today that use a pure public IP addressing scheme. Even in a lot of the government and military organizations where they have, plenty of IP address space allocated, it tends to be used both. So, there's nothing wrong with that. You have to do it today. And, there are some good reasons to do that. But to be honest, there are some great advantages to having end-to-end public IP addresses. And that's one of the big things IPv6 gets you in terms of how you can route the traffic, in terms of really understanding end-to-end application visibility. There are some great advantages there. But absolutely in today's environment, you really can't do it unless you've just got a huge amount of IP address space allocated to you.
All right, so here's a question from Leonard. So the question is there any impact, like network performance, etc., from running a product like LAN Surveyor? And the answer to that is no, not at all. I mean, the amount of bandwidth or the amount of traffic that's put on network is very low overhead and very minimal. So it's not something that should be concerning from going out there and doing a network scan on the infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, it's very lightweight, by default. Now, it does have some settings you could use to turn up the rate that it's doing its discovery. But even at the highest settings, I've never seen it personally affect network performance. Now, if you were on a remote connection with low bandwidth, trying to, from there, discover the entire enterprise, I could see maybe some issues. But generally speaking, that's not usually too big a concern. Great question, though. From Mark, he asked, does our product integrate with Windows DHCP servers? And so I'm going to assume he's talking about the IP address management product specifically. And today, the way you would do that is you'd actually just add in your DHCP scopes as ranges in the product, and mark those as reserved so that you don't, calculate those with available IP addresses like you would for statically addressed subnets and address ranges. However, down the road, we're actually working right now to add that feature to the product, and so, if you have maintenance for the product, it will be added down the road. I can't, give any kind of ETA yet. Obviously, it's just something we're working on. But that is one of the things we'll be doing, in the near future. Great question here from Ed. What are some good resources for learning IP addressing? Well, it's a good question because I haven't really seen personally any good online classroom or free videos that really go over it in detail, and that might be a good idea for something we could do here, to be honest. But there are some great books out there. TCP/IP Illustrated is one that I've read several times. It's a great reference. All the O'Reilly books are fantastic. There's actually one, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's a great book. The other thing that I would definitely recommend is, as you're on your path to learning more about IP address management and IP addressing, include within that learning more about DNS and bind, because DNS is really sort of the glue that holds your IP address scheme together. And certainly, my buddy Cricket Lou and his DNS and bind book, written at O'Reilly, it's the gospel as far as I'm concerned. So buy that book and read it. It's fantastic. But if you're really concerned, maybe go to a class. Go to a 3-day class somewhere and really learn it by heart, because this is one of those things that you want it to be second nature. You don't want to have to think about how many addresses are in a /24. You want to know it.
So there's a couple questions here regarding overlapping IP address spaces and kind of what that means. And so, specifically when we were talking about that this morning here, typically what we're referring to is private space address spacing. So you can have multiple netted domains or netted IP spaces across multiple locations or buildings, and so you can have them be duplicated since they are natted, and so you will have overlapping space.
Yeah, what that really means is that the same private address space is being used in 2 different locations.
Yes.
And a great example of this would be if you were an MSP who was managing some small businesses, and each of those small businesses had went out and bought a Netgear router, and by default they all use 192.168.1 as their subnet.
Yep.
So now you've got 100 customers, and each remote network has the same exact address range, 192.168.1/24. So they all overlap. Now that's a complete duplicate, right? And overlap might be described as something to where part of it overlaps. And you can get around a lot of that with NAT. Where it becomes increasingly difficult is where you have one host, like your NMS, that needs to talk to 2 different networks with devices of the same IP address. So think about it. You've got an Orion server, and you're polling these networks. And if you go down the path on the left, you get to 10.1.1.1 is a Cisco router. If you go down the path on the right, 10.1.1.1 is an Exchange server. How do you tell the NMS to get to both? And so most network management systems, including Orion, have ways of working around that by having multiple polling engines that then have routing metrics to get to each separate network. But it's something to really think about, and that's really what we're talking about when we talk about overlapping IP address space. Good question from John is, will older switches support IPv6, or is it going to be hardware independent? No, definitely some of the older switches probably won't be upgraded to support IPv6. Now, when you're talking about switches, and if they're that old, then chances are they're only doing layer 2 anyway, so it may not be that important. If you have a layer 2 device out there and it's just doing switching, IP really is only used for management, and maybe you don't even need to pull it. But that's something you will want to visit. Certainly, the newer technology, the more recent technology, does all of those things and supports IPv6. And really, the question I would ask of a vendor would be, not does this switch, this model number, not does the 6509 completely support IPv6 today, but what's the plan? What's the roadmap? Where does it support it? Because an answer of yes to that question, to me, is something I would really kind of maybe not trust, because full IPv6 support can mean lots and lots of different things. Good question here from Roddy is, how does the tracker work?
So this is the free tool that we talked about earlier called IP Address Tracker. And so primarily that's going to use basically ping and SNMP. So we'll use ping to go out there and determine if anything's on that address. And then if something does respond, we'll use SNMP to go out there and pull various system details back into the IP Address Tracker system.
I have some comments here from some people that actually were expecting to see a more detailed demo of the IP Address Manager. And I'm going to have to make a tough choice between answering, there's still a lot of questions are doing that. So If you want to ping me back directly at headgeek@solarwinds.com, I'll be glad to either personally or have someone else set up a detailed demo with you to walk through that product in a lot of great detail for you. So just do that if you'd like me to do that. Be happy to do that for you. And I'm going to try to answer as many of these questions live as I can. The ones we don't get to, I'll get back to via email over the next day or two. So the great question from Susan. She says that the product looks great for high-level general management, but she wants to know, that IP address, 1.1.1.1 belongs to widget number 23 and building number 1, room 217, et cetera, et cetera. Can you drill down to that level? And absolutely you can. I didn't show that because I was trying to buzz through the demo, and probably my own fault for that. But yes, absolutely, you can both browse to that level and search to that level and see the full details on each individual IP address. And you can actually go to oriondemo.solarwinds.com, which is the same server I was showing you earlier. Let me just bring that back up just for a second.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I can kind of talk to that a little more. So, I mean, we're definitely going to, discover a set of information on the nodes that are connected to an IP address, but you also have the capability. There may be internal specific attributes that are specific to your organization that you want to assign to a subnet or to a supernet or to a specific IP, and so you can define those at various levels within the product, and then that's also available to searching as well and to display in the UI and do filtering on. So it's both based on what we have, we discover from the device, and also it can be based on what's internal to your infrastructure.
Yeah, so a lot of the demo data, I don't have it completely populated, obviously, here in the lab, but you would see all these fields and more that are searchable and viewable and certainly customizable, so you can add your own.
Definitely.
But, that's really a great question. Let me go ahead and just flip back to the presentation now and just see where I can see the Q&A.
Let's see. So here's a good question from Stephen that I can talk about. So it looks like he's using the IP address module, and the device isn't showing up. It's not in DNS, so or we're not getting the response from DNS, and he wants to be able to populate a host name to it. And so yeah, definitely, and you don't want it to be overwritten by a scan. So there's a couple things you can do. I mean, if we can't get it from DNS, there's the ability to edit an IP address and go ahead and set it as static user defined or user managed, and when you do that, you can go in there and you can populate various data manually if we can't get that data via our traditional methods that we use to gather it.
Great question from Quinn here. It says he has Cisco Catalyst 3750 switches and they don't support NetFlow. Can they still monitor bandwidth utilization? Yeah, absolutely. So Orion or really any performance management application can monitor bandwidth utilization both for the switch as a whole and for each individual port, both in and outbound, and even break it down by things like errors and discards and unicast versus multicast. What NetFlow gives you is not only utilization, but the detail to see what they're doing with the traffic. So Orion natively would tell you this link is 97% utilized, and over the last hour it spiked from 30% to 99% possibly. What NetFlow would tell you is of that traffic, 80% of it was Brandon watching YouTube, 12% was Josh catching the Lakers game, 4% was Exchange, 3% was voice over IP, things like that. So that's really the value that NetFlow gives you. A great question from Callistus is, your solution, it seems, for the enterprise. Is there a solution for a small business who also needs to manage dynamic IP addresses? So yes, absolutely. Orion is actually built so that you can buy sort of the size you need. Whether you're a small organization with down to 100 elements, which really is only like a couple of 24-port switches nowadays, or a very large enterprise with thousands of network elements. So Orion is scalable all the way through for small businesses and large. But if you find that even that is overkill for you, grab the free tool. It's a great application, the IP address tracker, and it can do a lot for you there. Let's see, we already answered that one. Let's see here. Good question from Bobby. What if you have multiple instances of the same private IP subnet throughout the network, and the same subnet is used in each location but not routable across the WAN? That's exactly what we're talking about with duplicate IP address space, is that exact scenario. And so when it comes to IP address management, you can add those in the tool so that you label them that, the first time 192.168.1 appears, it's in Boston. The next time it's in Milwaukee. The scanning, though, will be limited based upon reachability on your network. So you really want to think about that and how you want to do that.
And even if you don't have access, if we can't, reach the end subnets, they can be manually managed within our solution as well. So, it's not that you can only add in things that we can get to or we can access via the scan engine. You can still manually manage them just like you do today in the spreadsheets, but have it in a centralized portal.
Kyle asked, what type of import functionality is included with the IP address management product?
Sure, I'll talk to that. So we got a couple different things available. So we do, as we mentioned, have the IP address tracker, the free tool, and also the IP address management product within the engineer's tool set. And we can import directly from that database into the IPAM module. And we also have the ability to import from an Excel or a CSV file as well.
Mike asked if there are any online articles out there or best practices for running IPv6 and IPv4 simultaneously. Yeah, there are tons of them out there. Just do a Google on IPv6 dual stack or on migration strategies. You'll see them. And I'll even try to put some links on my blog out there for you guys for some of the content from the summit I attended, because there were some great presentations, and they're all publicly available. So that's great. So does your question from Todd is, does the product allow for segregation of admin rights, i.e. lower level admins being able to find IP address space, and then a senior level admin being able to actually do the allocation?
So to kind of talk to that, so we do have the ability within the IP address management module to kind of set up delegation, if you will, to segment who can see or basically what right you can have. So you can have basically read-only or read-write into the system.
Yeah, and we'll be extending that and adding additional functionality, down the road. But yeah, you can absolutely do what you asked about there. Good question from Kurt here is, can you reserve IP addresses or mark them as reserved in the tool so they can be used at a later time? And yeah, both the free tool and the Orion IP Address Manager allows you to do that and makes it, quite easy to do. So, I'm going to go ahead and just have to end the webcast. We're out of time. I apologize. Tons of great questions. I'll try and get to the rest of them via email, and I'll also, for some of the more popular common questions, try to answer those via the blog out at solarwinds.com. You can go to /geek or, of course, thewhack.com. Brandon, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You're a great co-host, and for everyone that attended today, I really appreciate it. Remember, you can go to solarwinds.com for all your network management needs, and thanks a lot, and be careful out there.